Welcome back to the Scrape the Planet Web Scrapers and Python course. My name is Mitchell Edwards. I'm your instructor for this course. If you haven't watched the first couple of videos of this section or section 1 where I kind of intro what this whole course is about, my experience with web scraper development, things like that, I definitely recommend going back and looking at those. It'd be kind of odd if you switch to this section first because it's kind of like the most boring section of the whole course, but it's also probably the most important. So, ethics and legality of web scraping. Those two things are separate, but this discussion isn't about the difference between ethics and legality. It's about specifically the ethics and legality of web scraping. Let's start off with the obvious and something that we've discussed already, but not quite at length. Web scraping creates web traffic. Every request that you send has to be processed by the web server that you're requesting it from, whether it be an API request or a page scraper type request. This web server doesn't have unlimited resources. If you send too many requests that the web server can't handle, it may struggle with processing all of those requests and sending responses, leading to a slowdown in the website for you and for others, or possibly, in worst case scenario, even a web server crash. This is very bad. We're talking about lots and lots of money that companies can be losing if this happens. This is essentially what a distributed denial of service attack is, or at least a denial of service attack, also known as DDoS or DOS attacks. This is a worst case scenario and has major ethical and legal implications. Other issues such as licensing of data and its derivatives, which we'll talk about a little bit here in a second, have potential legal implications as well. This section is going to be a little bit heavier on the ethics than the legality of web scraper development because I'm not a lawyer. I think that should be very, very obvious. I don't know too much about the specific laws that govern scraper development and operation, but I basically know what boundaries that I have to stay in order to make sure that I'm safe. I will say, however, that if you have any doubt about what you're doing with web scrapers or with data that you've gotten from web scrapers, if you have any questions about like whether or not what you're doing is legal or whether or not what you want to do with that data is legal, please just ask a lawyer. Or don't do it, but most importantly, like if you really want to do it, just ask a lawyer. I know it can be pricey and complicated and they probably won't give you the answer that you necessarily want, but ask a lawyer. They're the experts on this. They get paid the big bucks and, build up tons and tons of student debt in order to become experts in, this kind of stuff. Most importantly, and something that I've already said several times, but I'm going to say it again because I don't think it can be said enough. I don't take a bit of responsibility with what you decide to do with this knowledge that you gain from this course. So if you do something dumb, if you knock over some major website servers, or if somebody sends lawyers a knocking on your door, I'm not going to lose any sleep at night. Frankly, I warned you. I told you how to do all of this stuff legally and ethically because we're going to be going through a lot of that, in this course. Just don't do stupid stuff with it. And don't blame me if you do stupid stuff with it and you get caught, because it is fairly easy to get caught with web scrapers. Now, let's talk ethics. In general, whenever you're designing a scraper, you want to do it in a way that just doesn't piss off the website administrator. There are real people who are running these websites, that build the websites, that maintain the websites, that keep everything running smoothly and secure all of the data and all of that fun stuff. It makes their already difficult life easier. And if you make them angry, they can make life more difficult for you. So it's kind of like a symbiotic relationship. You scratch their back by not sending tons and tons of requests to their site every second, and they'll scrape your back by just, in general, like not making your life more difficult, blocking your IPs and all of that fun stuff. Ethically, this means acknowledging that scrapers send far more requests and request far more data than the average human does. You're not going to be able to generate as much traffic as a typical scraper will on your own if you're using like a browser normally. They create more traffic, and more traffic can lead to slowdowns and problems for the server and the site administrators. So you want to typically limit the amount of requests you make to a reasonable extent. You technically can write a scraper that sends hundreds of requests a second to a server, but you probably shouldn't. It's not cool, it causes issues for other people, and usually you don't need to write scrapers in that way. Usually if you're doing that kind of thing, it's like the least efficient way to do it. It's not like good for anybody. It's not good for you. It's not good for the site administrators. It's just kind of like a silly thing to do. There are many ways that you can limit the amount of requests that you send as well as the amount of data that you're requesting. We'll go into practical design concepts in the next section, but in any scraper design, there needs to be a coded, explicit limit on how frequently requests are sent out. In general, it's a good technical and ethical decision to limit the amount of data you're requesting. If you're trying to get somebody's follower count on Twitter, for example, you don't need to go to their follower list and loop through every single page of followers and count each individual one. You can just go to their profile and look at their follower count, just like you normally would on a web page. The first option sends tons of requests, and it's really inefficient. It returns a long list of followers for each page when you really just want to count. It's harder to code, actually, than just going to their profile and retrieving their follower account from their profile. This is like a simplified example, but in general, you should constantly be trying to figure out how to avoid giving website administrators a headache and how to design the most efficient ethical scrapers that send the fewest amount of requests in a given time period as possible. The second big ethical issue around web scraper development is the use of data that you scrape. I have a lot of friends in the open source community who develop code that you can download and use for free. They usually are never compensated for their work that they do, and that code is often used for some really important, massive projects and applications. There are people who wrote completely free open source code that ended up contributing to the mission to Mars. Like, they've literally got their code on Mars right now. They often make use of legal licensing to define how their code can be used, changed, or copied. Some licenses allow you to literally do anything that you want with their code. You can change it, copy it, even build a business around it. Make profit from it, doesn't matter. Other licenses dictate what you can and cannot do. As long as you reasonably give props to the original creator for some licenses, that's perfectly fine. You can do whatever you want for it. Some licenses just straight up say that you're never allowed to profit off of the code that they make. Some licenses state that you can copy or change the code, but you can't monetize it in any way without permission from the creator. Others are completely different. You can monetize it, but you can't change the code. So licensing is obviously very, very important. Often it dictates just the code that the person wrote, but a lot of times it also dictates what you can and can't do with the derivative data. Data that you scrape, or data that is created from the data that you scraped, which is called derivative data, usually comes with some similar legal and ethical baggage. You can compare some licenses to academic requirements around source citing. If I copy a quote and use it in a tweet, there's usually no legal obligation for me to cite a source on that code. Data that you scrape, or data that is created from the data that you scrape, which is typically called derivative data, usually comes with some similar legal and ethical baggage as open source code. You can compare some licenses to academic requirements around source citing. If I copy a quote and use it in a tweet, there's usually no legal obligation for me to cite a source on that quote. It's ethically not a great thing to do. You should probably give props where they're due, but it's not a huge legal deal. In an academic paper or in a private enterprise report or something like that, it's not just a rude thing to do to copy somebody else's work. It can often carry legal or professional implications. If I scrape data from a site and release it for free, that may carry legal or ethical baggage with it. If the original owner of the data doesn't want me to do that and has a license stating such, I could get into legal trouble for duplicating, monetizing, or manipulating that data. And it probably isn't an ethically righteous thing to do either. If I monetize it, the potential legal baggage increases significantly because now all of a sudden you're making money off of somebody else's work. Every time money gets involved in something, things get more complicated and potentially more risky. It's really just in general, aside from all of the legal mumbo jumbo, it's just generally not cool to make a buck off of somebody else's work if it's explicitly against their wishes. In general, just understand that you're gathering other people's data out of their backyard. Most applications of scraped data are probably okay ethically as long as you don't just blatantly rip off somebody's data or their product. When I created scrapers to monitor and record posts on right-wing extremist sites, even though the target of the scraping itself was morally dubious, I didn't just put all the data on my own site and slap a paywall on it. I wrote up a blog post analyzing the data in my process to scrape it and released some of that data and the blog post itself for free. As in all things, a simple adage can be applied to scraping the web. Just be excellent to each other. Don't piss off site administrators. Don't steal other people's work. It's just really not cool. All right. Now we're done. That was really it. That was like, I think that's like a 10-minute recording. It'll probably be cut down to 8 minutes. That's not bad at all. I just spent just a very, very minor amount of time talking about something very, very important. And if you did stick with me through this, if you did watch this video, thank you. It's very, very important that you understand the legal and ethical obligations of scraper development, of kind of being a good steward of the internet. Now, next sections, we're going to really start getting closer to code. We're going to still be whiteboarding a fair bit, but it's more close to code. We're going to start talking about design approaches. We're going to talk about scraper design at a high level before getting into the code in the next sections. During the rest of the course, keep this section in mind though. Ethical concerns should be at the core of your big design and development decisions throughout the process. If you decide to make something faster, make sure you don't make it faster at the expense of site administrators. If you decide to gather a certain kind of data, make sure that you're kind of controlling how you release it and how you use it, and understand the legal obligations that you have if you decide to use somebody else's data in your project. Thank you so much for watching this incredibly important part of this course. Like I've said in previous sections, if you have opinions on this course, whether they be positive or negative, really just feel free to leave feedback on the course anytime that you want. It really helps me out. Obviously, it helps a lot with the algorithmic stuff, pushing it out to other people. And, you know, it kind of tells me what I did wrong, what I did right, things that you liked, things that you didn't like, things that I might change in future coursework. Cool thing about Udemy is that you pay for the course one time and you get all of its derivatives for free later on. So if I decide to add things to this course later on, you're going to get them. I may or may not add stuff to this course, but if there's something that I'm specifically missing that you would have liked to have seen discussed and enough people mention it, I'll probably end up adding it to the course just to kind of benefit the people who paid for it and to kind of make the course more complete. So if you have opinions on that, please leave a review and just let me know what I did right or wrong. Thank you so much. In the next section, we're going to be talking about scraper design processes.